Buddha's awakening, not what you think. The two crucial aspects of the Buddha's awakening are the what and the how, what he awakened to and how he did it. His awakening is special in that the two aspects come together. He awakened to the fact that there is an undying happiness and that it can be attained through human effort. The human effort involved in this process ultimately focuses on the question of understanding the nature of human effort itself in terms of skillful kamma and dependent co-arising, what its powers and limitations are, and what kind of right effort, i.e. the noble path, can take one beyond its limitations and bring one to the threshold of the deathless. As the Buddha described the awakening experience in one of his discourses, first there is the knowledge of the regularity of the Dhamma, which in this context means dependent co-arising. Then there is the knowledge of Nibbāna. In other passages, he describes the three stages that led to insight into dependent co-arising: knowledge of his own previous lifetimes, knowledge of the passing away and rebirth of all living beings, and finally, insight into the Four Noble Truths. The first two forms of knowledge were not new with the Buddha. They have been reported by other seers throughout history, although the Buddha's insight into the second knowledge had a special twist. He saw that beings are reborn according to the ethical quality of their thoughts, words, and deeds, and that this quality is essentially a factor of the mind. The quality of one's views and intentions determines the experienced result of one's actions. This insight had a double impact on his mind. On the one hand, it made him realize the futility of the round of rebirth, that even the best efforts aimed at winning pleasure and fulfillment within the round could have only temporary effects. On the other hand, his realization of the importance of the mind in determining the round is what led him to focus directly on his own mind in the present to see how the processes in the mind that kept the round going could be disbanded. This was how he gained insight into the Four Noble Truths and dependent co-arising, seeing how the aggregates that made up his sense of self-identity were also the impelling factors in the experience of the world at large, and how the whole show could be brought to cessation. With its cessation, there remained the unconditioned, which he also termed Nibbāna, unbinding, consciousness without surface or feature, the deathless. The meaning of the Buddha's awakening. When we address the question of how other enlightenment experiences recorded in world history relate to the Buddha's, we have to keep in mind the Buddha's own dictum. First, there is the knowledge of dependent co-arising, then the knowledge of Nibbāna. Without the first knowledge, which includes not only an understanding of kamma, but also of how kamma leads to the understanding itself, then no matter how calm or boundless the realization, it can't count as an awakening in the Buddhist sense. True awakening necessarily involves both ethics and insight into causality. As for what the Buddha's awakening means for us now, 4 points stand out. 1. The role that kamma plays in the awakening is empowering. It means that what each of us does, says, and thinks does matter. This, in opposition to the sense of futility that can come from reading, say, world history, geology, or astronomy, and realizing the fleeting nature of the entire human enterprise. The awakening lets us see that the choices we make in each moment of our lives are real, and that they produce real consequences. The fact that we are empowered also means that we are responsible for our experiences. We are not strangers in a strange land. We have formed and are continuing to form the world we experience. This helps us to face the events we encounter in life with greater equanimity, for we know that we had a hand in creating them. At the same time, we can avoid any debilitating sense of guilt because with each new choice, we can always make a fresh start. 2. The awakening also tells us that good and bad are not mere social conventions, but are built into the structure of experience. We may be free to design our lives, but not to change the underlying rules that determine what good and bad actions are and how the process of kamma works itself out. Thus, cultural relativism, even though it may have paved the way for many of us to leave our earlier religious orientations and enter the Buddhist fold, has no place once we are within that fold. There are certain ways of acting that are inherently unskillful, and we are fools if we insist on our right to follow them. 3. As the Buddha says at one point in describing his awakening, ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. In other words, he gained liberating knowledge through qualities that we can all develop: heedfulness, ardency, resolution. If we are willing to face the implications of this fact, we realize that the Buddha's awakening is a challenge to our entire set of values. The fact that the unconditioned can be attained forces us to reevaluate any other goals we may set for ourselves, any worlds we may want to create in our lives. On an obvious level, it points out the spiritual poverty of a life devoted to wealth, status, or sensual pursuits. But it also forces us to take a hard look at other, more worthwhile goals that our culture and its subcultures tend to exalt, such as social acceptance, meaningful relationships, stewardship of the planet, etc. These too will inevitably lead to suffering. The interdependence of all things cannot be, for any truly sensitive mind, a source of security or comfort. If the unconditioned is available, and it's the only trustworthy happiness around, the most sensible course is to invest our efforts and whatever mental and spiritual resources we have in its direction. 4. Even for those who are not ready to make that kind of investment, the awakening assures us that happiness comes from developing qualities within ourselves that we can be proud of, such as kindness, sensitivity, equanimity, mindfulness, conviction, determination, and discernment. Again, this is a very different message from the one we pick up from the world, telling us that in order to gain happiness, we have to develop qualities we can't take any genuine pride in: aggressiveness, self-aggrandizement, dishonesty, etc. Just this much can give an entirely new orientation to our lives and our ideas of what is worthwhile investment of our time and efforts. The news of the Buddha's awakening sets the standards for judging the culture we were brought up in, and not the other way around. This is not a question of choosing Asian culture over American. The Buddha's awakening challenged many of the presuppositions of Indian culture in his day, and even in so-called Buddhist countries, the true practice of the Buddha's teachings is always countercultural. It's a question of evaluating our normal concerns, conditioned by time, space, and the limitations of aging, illness, and death, against the possibility of a timeless, spaceless, limitless happiness. All cultures are tied up in the limited conditioned side of things, while the Buddha's awakening points beyond all cultures. It offers the challenge of the deathless that his contemporaries found liberating, and that we, if we are willing to accept the challenge, may find liberating ourselves. Faith in the Buddha's awakening. Focus on your breath. Know when it's coming in, know when it's going out, and allow it to be comfortable going in and going out. Experiment to see what rhythm feels best right now. As you stay with the breath, you're staying in the same place where the Buddha was staying when he gained awakening on the full moon night in May more than 2,600 years ago. We're commemorating that night tonight. In fact, we're commemorating 3 events in the Buddha's life. It was on the full moon night in May that he was born. And 35 years later, on the full moon night in May, he gained awakening. And 45 years after that, On the full moon night in May, he passed away into total nirvana. It's good to remember these events because they help put our own lives into context. What did the Buddha prove on the night of his awakening? He proved that there is a true happiness that doesn't have to depend on conditions. It's not touched by aging, illness, or death. And he proved that this happiness can be found through human effort. Now, the effort required qualities that were not special to the Buddha, qualities that we all share to some extent, simply that he had taken those qualities and developed them to their fullness. And so, what does this mean for our lives? There is that potential for true happiness, and it can be found by developing qualities within the mind. This is why the beginning of the path is having faith in the Buddha's awakening. In other words, he can do it, we can do it. So when we pay homage to the Buddha, we are also paying homage to this potential within ourselves. We're showing respect for our desire for true happiness. It's a good thing to show respect for, because the world tells us that that kind of happiness is impossible. Don't even think about it. Buy our things. Pretend that they make you happy. Settle for a happiness that's fleeting and compromised. So you can ask yourself, what kind of potential do you want to respect? The potential for fleeting happiness based on material possessions, relationships, travel experiences, whatever. A happiness that comes and goes? We know it's going to go, so to enjoy it, we have to close our eyes to huge areas of life. Or are we going to look for an open-eyed happiness that admits the drawbacks of our worldly pleasures? Where we devote ourselves to the effort that's required to develop those qualities inside the mind? That's our choice. What are those qualities? Well, they start with mindfulness and alertness, qualities we're developing right now. As we keep the breath in mind, that's mindfulness. And as we watch the breath, we also watch the mind to make sure it stays with the breath. That's alertness. If we catch it wandering off, then we bring with a quality called ardency, which means that as soon as we catch it wandering off, we bring it right back. While the mind is with the breath, we try to be as sensitive as possible to the breathing. Think of the breathing as a whole body process. Your entire nervous system, from the top of the head down to the tips of the toes, every part of the body is involved to some extent with the breath. And think of the breath not just as the air coming in and out of the lungs, but also as the movement of energy throughout the body. Try to be sensitive to that. As you're sensitive to it, use your powers of evaluation and observation to see what feels best. What kind of breathing feels gratifying throughout the body? This is a good path to follow because it doesn't save all of its pleasures to the end. There is pleasure in the meditation. There is also the pleasure of knowing that the path doesn't ask anything ignoble of you. All the qualities you develop are good qualities of mind, noble qualities of mind, which is why they say that the Dhamma is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. The quality of ardency is especially important. It's what helps the other good qualities of the mind grow. It's part of right effort. Right effort involves 3 issues. First is simply the amount of effort that you're up for. There is a famous story of a monk who had been very delicately brought up. His life was so refined that hair was growing on the soles of his feet. He never walked on anything rough. So when he decided to ordain and was doing walking meditation on a sandy path, his feet started bleeding. He began to get discouraged. Maybe, he said, maybe I should disrobe, go back and be a lay person. The Buddha saw what was going through his mind, so he appeared right in front of him. He said, "Are you thinking of disrobing?" The monk, his name was Sona, said, "Yes." And the Buddha said, "Sona, when you were a lay person, were you skilled at playing the lute?" Yes, he was. And when you played the lute and the strings were too tight, did it sound good? No. When the strings were too loose, did it sound good? No. In the same way, you have to tune your effort to what you're capable of. Not too tight, not too loose, just right for what you can do. That's the first issue of right effort, exerting the amount of effort that's right for you right now. You have to gauge what's too much, what's too little. But it's not just any old effort. That's the next issue. The Buddha defines right effort as generating desire. You have to have the right attitude. You have to want to do it. In other words, you have to value the path. You have to value the goal. Sometimes when the practice gets dry, you have to give yourself a good pep talk. Remind yourself of why it's a good thing to do. To do what? That's the third issue, which is the type of effort. If unskillful qualities based on sensuality, ill will, or cruelty arise in the mind, you try to abandon them. If they haven't arisen, you do what you can to make sure they don't. In other words, you can anticipate sometimes that these things will arise, so you try to restrain yourself ahead of time. If you know that looking at something is going to give rise to greed, anger, delusion, lust, or fear, you don't look at it. Or you try to look at it in a different way so as to prevent those qualities from arising. As for skillful qualities, if they haven't arisen yet, you try to give rise to them. When they have arisen, you do what you can to develop them as fully as you can. So there are 4 types of effort. Abandoning unskillful qualities that have arisen, preventing unskillful qualities that haven't yet arisen, giving rise to skillful qualities and then developing them. So all in all, right effort has these 3 aspects. 1, what's the right amount of effort you can handle right now? 2, what's the right attitude to learn how to give rise to desire so that you want? 3, to develop good qualities. You want to abandon unskillful ones. Even though there are times when we take lust, anger, and greed to be our friends, we have to realize these are not our friends. They turn on us. They make us do stupid things, and then when we reap the results, they run away. If you had friends like that, you wouldn't hang around them very long. But here they arise in the mind, so you identify with them, and you fall for them. This is an important lesson in the path. Just because something arises in the mind doesn't mean that you have to follow it, that you have to believe it. As they say, don't believe everything you think. Try to develop qualities that are your friends, that will lead you to do things that you will be proud to have done. Qualities like mindfulness, alertness, or the qualities that are traditionally associated with the Buddha: wisdom, compassion, and purity. These qualities may seem far away, but as the Buddha points out, they can be developed simply by taking true happiness seriously. Wisdom begins with the question, what when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? That question is wise because you realize that happiness depends on your actions. You can't just sit and hope for it to come floating by, or expect your Buddha nature to suddenly arise and do everything for you. You have to create the causes. And then you realize that long-term happiness is better than short-term. That's how wisdom begins. As the Buddha once said, when you see an abundant happiness that comes from sacrificing a lesser happiness, you should be willing to sacrifice that lesser happiness for the greater one. It sounds obvious, but when you look at the way people live their lives, it's as if they'd never heard of this idea. Everyone goes running for the quick fix. So always try to keep in mind that the long-term happiness is the one that's worthwhile. Then you reflect on the fact that if you want your happiness to last, it can't depend on the suffering of other people because they want happiness too. So you have to keep their happiness, their well-being in mind. At the very least, make sure that your happiness doesn't oppress them. That's the beginning of compassion. And finally, purity is the willingness to look at your actions and see if they actually do lead to true happiness. Before you act, try to anticipate the results. If you anticipate any harm, don't act in that particular way. If you don't anticipate harm, go ahead and do it. While you're doing it, watch to see what actual results come, because sometimes your actions give immediate results. If you see that they're harmful, you stop. If not, go ahead, continue with the action. Finally, once the action is done, reflect on the longer-term results. And if you see that they caused harm, go talk it over with someone you respect and resolve not repeat that action. As the Buddha said, this is how you purify your actions, so what you do and say and think actually does lead to true happiness. So all these qualities of the Buddha, wisdom, compassion, and purity, come from the simple principle of taking your true happiness seriously. You'd think that would be what we would all want to do, to take our true happiness seriously. But again, you look around and it's very rare. This is why it's useful to think about the Buddha, his example. This is why having faith in his awakening, that he really did it, and the happiness he found really was true, is such an important motivation in the practice. We can't know that for ourselves until we put his path into practice. This is why it requires a sense of conviction. Some of the results we can see along the way, but the ultimate result comes only after we've learned how to apply this principle of right effort. So take the Buddha's awakening as your working hypothesis. And as you show respect for the Buddha, remember, you're also showing respect for your desire for true happiness. And it's a good kind of respect. When you think of all the other things in the world that you could respect, this is really the most worthwhile.